Hello and welcome to this Queen Endgames video featuring a king and queen versus a king and lone bishop pawn. Alright, so I had a viewer kind of ask about zones for this endgame. What zone do you have to have your king in to win this? And so in this end game, there is a zone from A1 to A5 to D5 to E4 and then over to H4 and H1. So the one thing I found out though when I did a little deeper research on this is that this zone can change depending where the pieces are. So, especially for beginners, I don't know if it's, or even intermediate players, I don't know if it's a good idea to try and memorize zones that can change depending where your pieces are. So in this end game, the one thing to remember is that there's a way to get a draw if you're playing with black here. So in this position, you can't do it if white plays correctly. But in any bishop pawn endgame versus the queen, if the king can get over into the corner before the white king can assist, and then there's a possible chance for a draw, which I'll get to that. So first, I want to show you how this zone can change. We see here that the bar is showing that white is winning here, a mate in 19. But look what happens when we move the pieces around. Okay, if we move the king further back, now it's a draw. Okay, so that shows that it's a big difference in the outcome of the game depending how close or far away this white king is. So, if we move it back here, this is a draw. Okay, or excuse me, a win. If we move it here, it's a draw again. Okay, so what if we move it here? It's a win. But the zone that was given that goes from A5 to D5 to E4 to H4, I mentioned the subscriber asked about it in a comment, and I said that if your king can get in this zone, you can win. But it also depends on what else is going on in the game. So look, if we move the king over to this side of the pawn, now even though the king is in this zone, it's a draw. And the reason is there's a little drawing trick where the queen comes down and attacks this pawn, and if it captures the pawn while the king goes into the corner, it's a stalemate trick. So I'll show you some of these, but right now I'm just trying to highlight how this zone can change depending on where the other pieces are. So if we put it back here, we see that this is a win. Now what happens if we have the pawn up here on C3? It looks like that's a win. What about if the king is far away? It's still a win. So it looks like once you get this pawn to the 7th rank, black's 7th rank here, it's a draw. So I don't know. First we'll load this up and show you how this is a draw. So, white is going to bring the queen in and would like to get the king closer to the action. But once the king is too far away, we'll see that, let's see, queen to D5. It just is not possible to get a win here, and we'll show you why. All right, queen attacks. The king moves over here to C1, trying to get over into the corner for this stalemating opportunity. But if you get in front of your pawn like this, it does allow the king to move forward and gain ground. But the king just moves out of the way of the pawn. And there's another thing to watch out for here. Let's say this move is played. Well, now the king has to be careful. King to b1 must be played because you don't want to allow the queen to step on the queening square. If the king moves away and the queen takes control of the queening square and gets in front of that pawn without the king here to capture the queen, of course. Well, then you just stop that pawn in its tracks, and the white king can come down and mate. But first, let's see how you get this draw. So king to b1. Now, let's say we check. The king just moves into the corner. We have, I don't know, maybe this move, checking again. Protect the pawn. Let's say there's another check. And now, king to a1, this is the trick. If the pawn is captured, it's a stalemate here. So that is the trick to getting a draw with the bishop pawn. Let's say, I don't know, you can take a look at this. What else could be played? If you try and grab control of this queening square, the king just moves over and helps cover it. But that's the idea. You just move into the corner, and if they capture, it's a stalemate. All right. So let's try and get back to a similar position here. Let me reset this. All right. Set up position. Clear the board. So once again, we have a pawn, a bishop pawn about ready to promote. The king is here, ready to bring it forward. The queen, I don't know, we could put the queen somewhere on the other side of the board. But let's say the king is already close here. Well, now what do? Once you have a win, let's show how you can actually win this with the queen. So the best move, it looks like, is queen to a2, just pinning the pawn. That way it can't move forward. It's pinned to the king. So then let's say they recommend king to c3, but I guess that keeps the other king away. But it's not looking good. They recommend this is the best move, but then that would allow, let's see, queen to a3 check. King can go to c4, but then the queen will grab this square. So we could show you that. This is what I was talking about. Now the queen can just go here, and the pawn has been stopped in its tracks. And the king will just come down here and help the queen pick this off. Something like, let's say you go here to prevent progress by the king and protect the pawn. Well, now, let's see, you could just go here. And then what? King to b3 is the only way to protect the pawn. Otherwise, you just have to give the pawn up. But then we have this move, king over to d3, and the pawn will be picked off. So if we go back to the beginning here, what are other options? We have, let's say the king goes here, threatening to push the pawn forward. Well, now the best move is this. So a little trick here. Although now it's saying this is a draw. Why would this be a draw? Oh, because of the fork. Okay, with a knight. So that's a little trick there. If they promote this pawn to a queen, then you can swing over here and deliver a mate. But the knight is a little tricky. That would fork the king and capture the queen. So let's go back. After king to d1, what is the best move here? King to e3. Maybe the queen goes here, to prevent the pawn from moving. So now you have king to d2. This allows queen to b2, preventing the pawn from moving forward. So king to d1 would be best. But now, let's see, does king to d3 work? Maybe e3. Is e3 better? They recommend d3. But it doesn't matter here. Let's say they turn, you don't want to promote to a queen because there's just a mate over here. So let's say they recommend knight with check is best. And then what? King over to d4 or e4? E3. So king up to d4. We'll take a look at that. You could deliver a check here. Then king to e3. And it's not looking good after that. Let's say you go here. Well, then there's just a mate right here. Something like that. Anyway, all right. Back to the beginning here. Let's see if there's anything else you need to know. So what you're trying to do is get your king over into this side. And, let me load this up and I'll show you those examples again. Let's see here. All right. Set up position and clear the board. Okay, so one more time. If you have this pawn about ready to promote, and if the king is on this side of the board, ready to go into the corner, it's a lot easier, to get a draw out of it. So especially if the king is too far away. If the king is, way out in no man's land, well, you're definitely going to have a draw here. So let's see if that changes if we move the king. If that makes any kind of difference. Okay, if the king is right up in the action here and it's white's turn to move, of course, it does make a difference. So what about here? Still makes a difference. If we get further away, that still works. That does not. That does not. This does. So this is why I don't know if it's such a good idea to try and memorize what zones, what squares the king has to be in this endgame, because it can change. So here you have a win. Let's see, where's the draw at? Here it's a draw. Okay, but what if the king is over here? Now it changes again. So I would not, my recommendation, especially for a beginner, maybe intermediate, is not to try and figure out what zones to memorize that the white king, how close it has to be. You have to do a little bit of calculation, and, it might be a little tough. You could play these end games out on a computer to familiarize yourself with them. Put the computer on the highest setting and set up where it's a win, and then just try and figure out how to do it. And through some repetition, that'll help you remember the patterns a little bit better. So if the king is out here in the center, it's more likely white will win, especially if the king is close enough, the white king. But if that king is over here in the corner, then it doesn't work because of that stalemate trick. So, that is what you have to remember in this end game. To win as white, you need to be close, close to the action. See if our king gets up here, right up next to that pawn, and it's white's turn here to attack with the queen and the king. You're probably going to pull out a win. But if that king is off to the side, we see it doesn't work. So just remember that. In the queen versus bishop pawn on the 7th rank, about ready to promote, it makes a difference where the kings are. White needs to get their king up close to the pawn. Black should try and stay in the corner over on this side if possible. Here it doesn't make a difference because the king is not close enough. So what if we get the king closer? See, once we get closer to the pawn, it makes all the difference on whether or not you can win or not. Once the king is out of play, even that works. That works. That's pretty impressive. Oh, because you're in check. Okay. Um, All right, let's move that queen. All right, so once again, you're not in check here. It's white's turn to move. Where does this king need to be? Oh, wait, maybe there? Nope. Here. Once the king gets up here, it's a win. Here it's a win, win, win. What about that? Okay. So I guess this is a way you could find these zones. If you go here on the learn, then analysis, and then you set up this position and you're able to move the king around. So we see that the zone would be here, here, let's see, not there. So we have to stay on this 5th rank. So stay on the 5th rank. There it doesn't work. Here it does work. Let's move this queen back. Does not work there. It does work here. No. Okay, so here that little pattern seems to be working. That was, oh, nope. Once you get here, it does not work. So you have to go within this G1 to G4 to E4 to D5 over to A5. So that's just too much to remember. So, especially if it'll all change. So here it's good, but once the king is over here, now that zone is out the window and it doesn't work. So I would probably not try to memorize any zones like this in the end game. You could if you want, but it might be a lot of work. Instead, just remember that you want to try and get your king over to the pawn as quick as possible. Prevent the king from going from the center over to the corner here, because then there's a possibility of staying in the corner, and if you grab the pawn, it would be a stalemate. All right. Well, I hope that helped you some in this queen versus bishop pawn endgame on the 7th rank. Now, remember, once the pawn is up the board more, that changes everything. So let's say the pawn is here and it's not on the 7th rank yet. We could even put the king way out in the middle of nowhere. Well, the biggest problem is that the queen can just get in front of the pawn. So let's see what happens with that. Even that works. Because the queen, oh, it'll be easier for the queen to get in front of that pawn. So, we see, even if this is on the 7th rank, once the queen gets in front of that pawn, now the king can just take its time and stroll down there and help the queen pick off that pawn and go for the win. So, hopefully that helped you some in this end game. Feel free to leave comments if you have any more questions about this end game or other queen end games in this series, or anything else. Also, like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for watching, and have a super chess day.